This is episode 4 of the Christian Travelers Network, and today our guest, Peter Grier, will share what it means to travel as a Christian based on God's Word and his travel experiences. Welcome to the Christian Travelers Network, where travel stories, community, and scripture combine. Hey Christian travelers, so glad you are here. A few things to note before Peter joins us. I'd like to encourage you to subscribe and share our podcast at christiantravelers.net. There you can find some information about our podcast and be entered into a giveaway for Peter's book, Travel in Tandem with God's Heart. Great book for those of you wanting to hear some Christian travel stories and explore what God says about travel. And you could win some cool Christian travel stickers made by Wonderfully Made Art. But let's go ahead and give a warm welcome to Peter Grier. When Peter's not off traveling, he is based in Cork, Ireland, and works for Christian Unions Ireland, helping students encounter and share the living word of Jesus. In his spare time, he trail runs local mountains with friends, enjoys sharing food, his house, and life in community with diverse people in the city, and reads voraciously. Hi, Peter. So glad that you are here. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do and how you got involved in travel ministry?
Yes, great to be with you today. Well, as you mentioned, I work for Christian Unions Ireland. That's a campus ministry in Ireland, helping Christian students in their faith and helping them to share their faith. And so I travel around supporting student-led movements on different university campuses around Ireland. And I guess so much of my job is traveling from campus to campus and sleeping on sofas and floors of people. But many people started to ask me questions. Well, is this the best use of time? Is travel just a waste of what could be better spent? Or how do you make the most of the fact that you travel so much? And not only that, in my experience, but students that I work with, well, they eat, sleep, and dream travel. And not only is student culture consumed by it, but I guess the whole of our culture, isn't it, shaped by and bathed in this culture now of travel? Um,
Yes.
and so I think of my housemate Dan. He was a student who graduated and decided once he graduated, well, let's pack my bike up, head off to New Zealand, and cycle home over the course of 1 year back to Ireland again, across the whole world.
Wow.
Within a few days, I got a call from his parents saying, "Do not tell Dan this, but we need to meet you, because we need you to stop him going." Um, and so different generations have different reactions to travel, but no one is left unaffected by it. And so that started to, yeah, just get my juices flowing and make me think, well, what is it about travel that a Christian like myself should be thinking or practicing or enjoying about travel?
Yes. Do you mind my asking, how did you respond to his parents when they visited?
Um, Good question. Um, well, I mean, it's one of those sensitive things. I always like to hear everything from everyone's viewpoint, and so first I listened to why they were concerned and to see whether some of their concerns were actually genuine and real, and perhaps were things that were worrying things. And then trying to weigh them up. Well, how do you bridge build between what they were saying and maybe some of their genuine concerns, but also some of their just fears because they didn't know, they weren't brought up in a generation who this was normal for. And how do we build a bridge between that and then between Dan's thoughts and dreams of travel and what he's likely to actually respond to if we'd all just come down and stamped down and said, "You're not doing this." We had to weigh up the costs of, well, what if he just goes off by himself and has no support and doesn't have any connection with anyone? So it was a difficult few days and weeks of helping the two generations talk to each other and helping constructive ideas come from each other about how this might be a positive thing, or how that could certainly come from it, even if there were still a few niggling doubts from one side or the other. So, in a long story short, it was very difficult.
Yeah, I think that is a pretty typical concern as generations tend to view travel so differently. But that's really cool how you work through that. Um, I guess before we dive a little further, how many places have you traveled to, and do you have any favorites?
Oh, you asked two hard questions. Um, Uh, I think its tally of countries is probably only up to about 17 or 18 at the minute. So it's not actually too many by some travelers' standards, and mostly confined to Europe and North Africa and the Middle East. And so I've yet to explore a good chunk of the world. But I guess most of my favorite travel memories have been time with people who are precious to me. So my sister lives in Africa, and I don't often get to see her and her family. But once
Mhm.
she came back for 9 months to Europe to take a break from the toil and the stress of the work that she was doing in medicine in Africa, and we'd promised each other, well, at some time in our life we'll run a marathon together, and so we looked around Europe to see where was the most stunning marathon to do together, and decided on up in the Arctic Circle in Tromsø in Norway. And it was during the June solstice, and so when the sun doesn't go down at all in that part of the world, the midnight sun, as they call it. And so being up there and being with an old university friend who put us up and showed us around and took us off to some of the stunning islands of the local area, just paradise islands with no one there on them whatsoever, and just all to enjoy by ourselves. That's precious, and so many of my memories like that are favorite because they've been with people I love and cherish.
Wow. For those that don't know, was it warm during that season or was it kind of chilly? It's the Arctic Circle.
The Arctic has those visual pictures of just ice and snow and everything. Um, but okay, it was surprisingly warm. We were able to camp out overnight on the top of some of these islands and camp in shorts and t-shirts and not have to worry too much. So if you get the right few weeks for it, it can still be a pleasant temperature for an Irish person anyway. We're not used to sunshine over here, so
Yeah. Okay, so travel ministry, it isn't a very common term, but it's something that you're very passionate about. So, how would you define it and why do you feel that it's so important?
yeah, travel ministry is a bizarre phrase in some ways, and in some ways, I just want to be, well, travel ministry is just travel as a person of faith, because I think travel ministry is really just travel as it was meant to be. So we were
Mhm.
created for incredible purpose in this world, and made for so much more than just the material. Physical realities and experiences that we have around us. And so, travel ministry, in some ways, I would just see as living for that purpose. And you probably don't consider yourself, and not everyone's in a full time Christian job such as the one that I do. And yet, I suppose we still all are these people who take part in travel ministry, or just to put it in other terms, enjoying travel as it was made to be under the goodness of our God and Maker. And so I see that's so important because either you live for how we were made to live and enjoy it and enjoy the wonder of all that our good God has provided for us and give Him glory and thanks for it, or we're not doing travel ministry, we're not traveling through under his lordship, and we decide, well, no, we're just doing it for ourselves or for another reason. And
Mm.
so, in a very basic sense, we're we're left, with those base blocks of which we're going to do. And so I just think it's so important that we get to enjoy the richness and the fullness of this world around us, as it was made to be enjoyed.
Yes, I think that is a very good way of describing that. And we often have different reasons for traveling, but keeping God in the center of that is so important. Um, as you've kind of explored scripture, I read some of your blogs. What have you found that God says about travel?
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey of exploring, of trying to figure out what God says about travel, because it's not an easy question. Um, you look at the Bible, and I started to read stories right the way from the early parts of the Old Testament, all the way through to the New Testament, and travel, it just seems to flow off every page. And to start with, it really, really excited me, and I thought, this is incredible. We have a God who seems to have given us travel stories and has travel at the heart of so much of what's going on the pages of the scriptures. And yet, at the same time, as I was getting excited, I was starting also to get very puzzled, because you read the travel of Genesis, and there's wanderers who get banished from Eden to start with, and keep on moving east. There's people who are scattered and spread out by the judgment of God across the world. There's people who are scattered by the blessing of God across the world. There's raiding parties of other nations who travel. There's pilgrimages of the Jewish people going to the festivals. There's so many different types of travel that are going on, but none of them were really travel that I was particularly thinking of. Travel that I do daily, travel that I do on my holidays, and as I seek to plumb the depths of the incredible things that there are to see in the world. And so, yeah, it provided those tensions for me at the same time, and it took me a while to start to try and piece together. Well, what does God say about maybe our pleasure travel, or the travel that maybe quite a few of us would do in this world, and the travel that we dream of? And that's not absent, perhaps absent in one way from concrete examples in the Bible, but the whole of God's big picture, his big panorama, it gives us a flavor of what even our pleasure travels would look like. But it's certainly not an answer that came immediately, and I'm still enjoying exploring different corners of what exactly that is. But certainly, it's the more and more I read, the more I saw, well, this still is what I think is important for us to be wrestling with, and not just my travel experience or your travel experience, because they'll always be quite limited in nature, no matter how many people we ask. But what the maker, the one who's given us travel, the great travel author himself, what he wants us to enjoy about travel.
Yes. And travel seems to constantly be changing. In the Old Testament, there were a lot of nomadic travel, and now I would say just a few generations ago, it was less common for families to travel long distances. And yet today, we see people traveling the globe on a regular basis. There's just kind of this constant tension between wanting to stay in place, but also wanting to move everywhere. So, how do you see this tension impacting Christian travelers?
Yeah, that's a tension that we all feel as individualism has gripped our, particularly our Western nations, and we love to have the freedom, and that phrase, the world is your oyster. Oh, it's so true in one way. And yet we're so lonely. We're some of the most loneliest generations that have been in recent years. From stories and from statistics that seem to be coming out, and so that balance between travel and yet bedding down into deep communities, communities that are more than just attending services every so often, but are real life on life communities of faith. and of vibrancy. And it is a tricky balance, a balance that I don't feel I've anyway mastered or figured out exactly how to go about it. So I would love to hear even from yourself and others what that looks like. But certainly one that every time I go away, I certainly have to bear in mind, well, what impact will this have on me and the local community here that I'm most part of, and me serving within that and enjoying the depth of that. But also, when I travel, would it be possible to connect with either other believing communities or even in the places that I go to? How could I best serve and enjoy the deep communities and not just be a passerby who's looking to consume from other people and take what I want, but to really enjoy the the great variety and diversity of the world's communities, and not just grab from that, but also give back to those communities. And what that looks like, oh, if only I could figure out, probably different in every place that I travel to,
Hmm.
but questions that certainly are ones that I love to mull over before I take every journey.
Yes. I think I went to Europe last summer, and I was super excited to do a solo trip, and I was really excited to experience a lot of the culture and things, but what I wasn't prepared for was how lonely it could be at times traveling in that way, and it's definitely something that you wrestle with. Um, Kind of along those lines, how do you suggest building relationships and getting connected with those Christian communities while traveling?
A great question to ask, and one that I normally turn to people who have a better knowledge of each of the places that I'm traveling to. So whether that be a Christian travel company or whether that be local members of my church back home, and I ask them, well, does anyone know people in this place that I could connect with? And quite often that might start to yield some answers or some people that I could connect with. Sometimes just Googling different churches or different organizations who work in a certain part of the world has been very helpful. But it's, I guess, also realizing that if every travel person was to do this for every trip that they took, it could also get very wearying for the people working in these places who would just be constantly taking us around and showing us and introducing us to places. And so it's having some sensitivity too about what will actually benefit the local people on the ground,
Mm-hmm.
and not just enhance our travel experience.
While you're traveling, I'm guessing that you've noticed that those communities, those Christian communities, can look very different place to place. There's kind of a little bit of diversity there. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, well, I guess the most dramatic differences of some of those are when you enter countries of radically different worldviews or cultures to our own Western ones, perhaps. And so I guess that's a flavor of where I've seen that most. So particularly traveling in North Africa and the Middle East, it's been a great joy. And yet a great sorrow at the same time to see believers there who are highly persecuted, some of them, whether just by friends and family, or in some instances by government. Um, and seeing them wrestle with how do we do church and how do we interact with outsiders, to see them going from people who were initially very suspicious, perhaps, of me, and of any person who just rocks up onto their doorstep and says that we're one in Christ and can I come and spend time with you? But then, as barriers are broken down, both cultural barriers and linguistic barriers and other things, to be able to sit with some of these people in hard situations, and yet situations where they radiate the joy and peace of knowing Jesus and of knowing eternal life is theirs in Jesus, and to worship in. I don't have much of their language in some of these underground settings that I was traveling in, but to worship with them the way that they love to worship, with singing their songs and in their style and in their theology that has been developed in their culture, and to sit at their feet and to learn from them is one of the blessed experiences of traveling, and one that I'll forever remember. And I guess every culture, whether persecuted or whether or not, has some of those unique takes their culture does on certain doctrines, of certain beliefs, of certain practices. And traveling just reminds me how small minded perhaps I am sometimes, and
Mm-hmm.
how wide and how deep the Christian church is across the world, that God is building, and how wonderful and joyful that can be.
That's awesome. Do you have a like worship experience that was super unique that comes to mind when you think of this?
Um, I think perhaps actually one closer to home than some of those. It was our last ever holiday as a full family together before my sister left for Africa, and we went up to the Scottish Islands where she worked as a doctor for a while. And out in the Western Isles of Scotland, you come across some islands that are probably 90% believing and practicing Christians who have a living faith in Jesus. And it's marvelous. We were at a time where it was the season within a particular church denomination, where they would share, well, we call it different things, the Lord's Supper or the Eucharist or communion together. And they had special seasons during the year where they would gather for a whole week or 2 weeks in homes in the local area, and that they would prepare themselves for taking this meal together. And as they prepared themselves and shared life together, came and went every single evening from these different houses.
Mm-hmm.
It was absolutely powerful to. Someone would just start singing, and in the ancient Gaelic traditions in Scotland, they love the Psalms, and in fact, some churches completely just sing the Psalms and only the Psalms,
Hmm.
and they would start up these haunting melodies, and as soon as one person would start, the whole room would break into four-part harmonies, just
Whoa.
quietly, and not in a big choral blast of a choir as such, but just quietly in their own ways, from the people who consider themselves good singers, through to some of my friends who would say they couldn't sing a single note, and yet everyone joining in worship to the Lord Jesus. And stuff like that just sends shivers down your spine, doesn't it?
Yes.
Um, and I wouldn't be the most traditional in worship style necessarily, but there was something powerful about all of that that was really incredible.
Wow, that is amazing. Um, so you have published a book. We were kind of talking about how there aren't many resources out there for Christians who enjoy traveling. Um, so would you tell us a little bit about your book?
Yes, certainly. It was something that I hadn't set out to do, so it wasn't on my bucket list to write a book. Um, and yet, because travel had captured my heart so much, and because I wanted others to be able to think through the topic, when I was approached by a publisher in the UK, InterVarsity Press in the UK, I, although hesitant, said yes, okay, let's go for this, and let's see if we can get just something that gets our juices flowing. So you'll have heard from my experience that I've only traveled 17 or 18 countries, so some of you will have traveled far more than that and will be far more seasoned travelers. And so, what I wasn't going to say in the book is here's everything that you need to know about travel from my point of view. And it's definitely not an all-encompassing book or a really heavy, in-depth book, but it's something that I hope people will be able to pick up on their travels, and to discuss together. It tells stories of many people around the world, whether it be stay-at-home parents, whether it be solo travelers, whether it be single mums traveling with their kids, whether it be different things throughout that, different experiences, but and ultimately tries to connect them into the big Bible story of travel and what God thinks of travel. And at the end of every chapter, there's some questions and there's a prayer that can be prayed together. So really hoping this is just a launch pad, a kind of a trampoline for people to bounce into their own thinking of, well, how do faith and travel go hand in hand, and how can we make the most of our travels? So I hope that no matter whether it's parents thinking of why the current generation is so obsessed by travel, or whether it's you or I who are already captivated by travel and want to know how to make the most of it from a faith point of view, I hope the different chapters just might give some flavour and some exciting stories in there as well, of stories from every continent across the world, about how we can go about that.
That is really cool, and I'm excited to read that. What is the name of your book, and how can we find it?
So the book is called Travel in Tandem with God's Heart. So Travel in Tandem with God's Heart. And certainly is sold by all the major booksellers, certainly in Europe it is anyway. So if you go to Amazon.com or any of the major online retailers, and if you're across in Europe, Book Depository and some of the major book-selling chains will have it in their bookshops. Or I was brought up in a local Christian book-selling family. My dad was a bookshop manager, so I better say, so if you have one, support your local Christian bookshop too, and I'm sure they'd be glad to sell you a copy of it, or on the publisher's website, ivpbooks.com. So ivpbooks.com. Or of course, share or whatever it is to win a free copy of it. I'd love to give one away on this podcast, and so I'm sure people can check out how that will be possible too.
Yes, that'll be on our website at christiantravelers.net. If you sign up for our podcast, you'll be entered for the giveaway. And kind of last big question I have for you. I like to ask people on our podcast, what has been your biggest God moment in all of your travels?
Brilliant question, and it's hard to pick. God has a marvelous way of turning up in all the normal, ordinary moments, but also in some fairly dramatic ways over the years. And so I had to think long and hard about this one. Yet I can't help but remembering one moment. It was a very ordinary travel moment. I was travelling on the road between two universities out east in County Waterford in Ireland, and travelling west to County Limerick. And I was in a really bad mood. It's about a 2 hour journey. I'd had a long day. I'd been on the road for several days at that point, and I was really bitter and really. I, I guess I had the radio on full blast as I travelled, and I had no interest whatsoever in thinking anything but thoughts of self pity for myself, and thinking, justifying all that had gone on that day in my head, replaying things that had gone on that didn't go quite as I wanted to, and really just wasn't in a good mindset. And yet, as I travelled, I noticed over at the side of the road, we don't have a very good public transport system in Ireland in certain places, and so there was a hitchhiker sticking his hand out, and looked like the stereotypical Irishman of postcard pictures, long ginger beard, and a young lad in farmer's costume. And I thought, oh, okay, then I'll pick him up. So I pulled in this tiny village. He jumped in, and the first question he asked was, well, where are you going? And we got that sorted. The second question he asked, with no prompting whatsoever, was, tell me, what's a Christian? And I just, my heart stopped, and I tried to keep on driving and thought, how on earth does this guy ask me this question? There was nothing in my car that would given him there wasn't a big "I love Jesus" sticker on my car or anything like that. And in many ways, it's a question that Irish people just don't ask, because everyone in Ireland is supposedly Christian, and so So it was a baffling question, even for an Irish person to ask at all. And yet, God had been at work in his life, and over the course of the next 10, 15 minutes, he was in the car. He explained to me that he'd been off traveling around the world. He'd bumped into a team called Youth with a Mission, who many of you may have heard with, off in the islands. Way off in the Pacific Islands, and he'd stayed at a base there for a few days with them, and he was so struck by the warmth and the beauty of the community and their focus on Jesus that seems so different to him, that he said to them, "I must have some of this. How, when I leave you, how can I experience Jesus in the way that you seem to know him so personally and in such warmth of community?" And they told him, "Well, here's a Bible, go home and read that, and come out to our base in Hawaii for our summer team, and you'll find far more of that." And so he had arrived home. His parents thought he had met a cult. All of his local rural farming community thought this was highly suspicious and not to be touched at all. And they said, "Oh, anyone who says that they're just Jesus followers, don't trust them." And so he got into my car as the next person that he'd encountered apart from his rural farming community, and said to me, "Well, what is a Christian?" And he thought me, because of my accent from the north of Ireland, might be able to give him an answer. And so, just as much as I just said to you there, he said to me, and then literally we arrived at the farm that he was wanting dropped at, and he got out of my car, and just before he closed the door, shouted out, "Thank you very much. That was very helpful." Slammed the door and walked off into the field, and I couldn't even see where he was going. And so moments like that again just lift me from my self-centeredness and my bitterness and my what should have been a prayerful car journey, and yet I was so consumed with myself, and reminded me that actually God is weaving an incredible tapestry in this world. And these are just the whispers of him at work. What excites me more is that he tells us in his word that actually he speaks so clearly in far bigger ways throughout the scriptures, and that if this was just one of those spine-tingling whispering moments, that how much more was there in God to enjoy and explore and get to know him. And so from one traveller, an Irishman who'd been right across the world, to me in my mundane travels of work, yeah, that was one of my favourite moments of God being so obvious.
Wow, that is an incredible story. Well, thank you, Peter, for being on our podcast today. If people want to connect with you, how can they find you on social media, etc.?
Well, this is where it gets it gets harder. Given my love for North Africa, I've picked an Arabic word for my social media, algebra. It's the derivative of algebra, uniting broken parts. That's what I feel God does, even through travel, unites us together as a broken humanity. So that's I'll just spell it for you: ALJABR. ALJABR. I'm that underscore Cork. Or you can probably find me slightly easier both my blog there on WordPress, but also on social media. If you just search for the hashtag travel in tandem, and soon enough you'll see posts from a Peter cropping up. And even if your Arabic's as poor as mine is, you'll still be able to find me regardless.
Well, thank you so much. And we've really appreciated your insights today. And thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been brilliant.
Okay, well, Christian travelers, I'd encourage you to check out Peter's Instagram, Twitter, and blog, and also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and subscribe to our podcast at christiantravelers.net. You'll be entered in a giveaway for his book, along with some fun Christian travel stickers. In fact, Josie, the founder of Wonderfully Made Art, will be joining us next week and sharing some of her travel experiences as a spouse to a travel nurse and how she started Wonderfully Made Art as a result. Until next time, God's blessings and safe travels.